Hello, lovely people. Today I'm going to be talking about evolution. Now, I'm not talking about this to upset people. I'm talking about this for the kids in biology class whose teacher did not explain evolution right, correctly, or well enough for them to understand. Maybe they explained it correct, but they didn't explain it enough. And now the kid has questions and they just don't understand. So I'm here for those people. If you are going to be a person who leaves a nasty comment down below saying this is not part of your religion, I don't want to hear this on the internet, or any type of comment, please don't. If you are going to do that, I would not like you to watch my video. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. I'm saying that in a way because I understand completely. I understand that is not part of people's religions. I understand that evolution is a very touchy subject, that it is not talked about so much that when it is talked about, people get this nasty tone about it. So I'm talking about the science part. I'm not talking about any of the religion. I'm talking about science. Again, I'm talking about this for the kids in biology class who did not explain this correctly, who did not get enough information, whose teachers maybe just didn't do it right or well enough for them to understand. So that is why I'm doing this. Please don't attack me. Okay? Yeah, alright. Let's get into this before people attack me. Okay? Great. So I made a Quizlet for this, so maybe if you don't want to watch the whole video, everything that I basically talk about in this video will be on this evolution Quizlet. You can just go to this link right here, or you can just go into Quizlet, type in my username, and if you look for this title, you should be able to find it. Click it, go to the Learn setting, which I'll show you real quickly, because the Learn setting is actually pretty cool, and I like it. I love using it. It's great. So, Learn section. It gives you like flashcards, and it also gives you, you can answer with the term and definition. It gives you, the questions could either be in flashcards, a written example, a multiple choice question. And the written questions, you can choose if they want to be in type term or type definition. You can also reset your progress if you want to start over, and if you want the audio off or on this. So, again, you can go to Quizlet, use the Quizlet that I made. And I guess on Quizlet too, there's other people who also made Quizlets that you can use to study evolution. I also like using Brain Pop and Discovery Education. Discovery Education has a standard deviant video that talks about evolution. It's okay. My favorite type of way to learn though is Quizlet. If you're more of a listener, I would use videos such from again Brain Pop or Discovery. If you're a visual, I would maybe on YouTube, I guess you could search up videos, and they what's the word? So animated. If you look up animated videos, they come up with an actual way to show you, because there's something in biology that I was really confused on, and I had to use an animated representation, and that helped me understand it more. But maybe you're just like me and you need stuff like this. So Quizlet, and this does not benefit me in any way, so don't be like, oh, she's just doing this to benefit herself. I'm really not. I get nothing from Quizlet, just saying. So if it helps you, use it. I made this and it took me an hour. I want you to use it. Be my guest, of course. So now I'm just going to be talking about evolution for the rest of this video, and it's a lot, so I really don't know how long this video is going to be. And if you don't want to stay around for it, again, Quizlet, Discovery Education, Brain Pop, or YouTube also has other videos or many other Quizlets or studying ways to learn evolution that I'm sure are going to be great. And you are just going to be seeing a black screen for the rest of this video. I am so sorry. We don't look too good today, and that's not the point. We talk about evolution. So, we're going to be talking about evolution. First, let's define evolution. Evolution is a genetically controlled change in a species or population over successive generations. Evolution, it is a theory and a fact. The theory of evolution deals with how evolution happens. It is our understanding that the process is always changing. And the fact of evolution, there's a huge amount of indisputable evidence for its occurrence. And I'm not saying that from my personal opinion, I am saying that from biology and the evidence that I will talk about later on. So, how have we observed it? We've observed evolution through dogs. Dogs have been artificially selected for certain characteristics, meaning that dogs all have a common ancestor, meaning a wolf. Dogs all have certain traits that have been artificially selected for. The peppered moth. It is a natural selection. The peppered moth was basically on the suit on the trees selected for the dark alleles in the moths. The dark alleles in the moths, meaning that the darker moths were more able to survive because of the soot on the trees during the Industrial Revolution. So soot is the dark, chalky substance that usually comes from gas products. So when it got to the trees, it covered the trees in a dark product. The peppered moths that were darker, they were more able to survive. But the peppered moths that were a lighter color, the birds more so saw them and ate them, which left the dark peppered moth, to survive. And how does evolution apply to us now? It applies to us now through antibiotic resistance and resistance in DDT. Antibiotic resistance means bacteria might become resistant. The antibiotic acts as an environmental pressure. It weeds out those bacteria with low resistance, and only those with high resistance survive to reproduce. Resistance in DDT is referring to insects. It is common in houseflies. The flies are developing proteins and receptors, which is making them resistant to the chemicals. The history of evolution. The history of evolution. Actually, I'm going to give you guys a few vocabulary words because I feel like before I start talking about this, you guys should understand the words that I'm actually talking about. So, let's talk about this. Protocells. Protocells are the first cells on Earth and they're prokaryotic. Evolution, once again, is a change in the number and types of alleles present in a species over time. It occurs in populations. Allele is a version of a gene, brown versus blue eyes or tall versus short. Heredity. It is the passing down of traits from parent to offspring, from one generation to the next. Mutation is when a change in a gene's DNA occurs. Variation. Variation is a difference in appearance in members of the same species. For example, humans have blonde, red, and brunette hair. There's many more differences because there's many more hair types. Natural selection. It is when organisms with more successful phenotypes for a given environment survive to pass their alleles down to offspring. Okay, I think that's all the definitions I'm going to give you guys for now, and hopefully you can understand where I'm going from now to the next part of this, and there will be more definitions to come along. And actually, I'm going to give you guys an example of natural selection because I'm going to be talking about that a lot. So an example of natural selection is a lion that has good eyesight and reflexes will be able to survive and produce more offspring, which the offspring will also most likely have those traits. A lion that is slow or weak will not survive or reproduce. So it is referring to survival of the fittest. It is the most common evidence of evolution. And resources are a factor of natural selection. Okay, let's talk about the history of evolution. I am probably going to butcher his name, so I am so sorry. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He was wrong, so let's just start off with that statement. He studied giraffes. He believed in the idea of use and disuse. Let's just explain it this way. The more an individual uses a body part, the more likely it is that the body part will be seen in their offspring. So basically, let's just say if you got a tattoo, your kids would get it. We know that's not true. So if you just keep that idea in your head, you will be able to remember that Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was wrong when he tried explaining evolution. However, Charles Darwin was the person who developed his theory of evolution in 1838, but he didn't publish his book on it. His book proposed the idea how one species might give rise to another, and when food was limited, competition meant that only the fittest would survive. It would lead to natural selection of the best adapted individuals and eventually evolution of a new species. So, let's just talk about that for a second. Charles Darwin was the person who came up with the correct theory of evolution, not Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So, how do we explain this? Okay, we're going to talk about something that was in his book, adaptive radiation. So, if two populations became isolated for years, genetic difference would become marked. That is basically what adaptive radiation is. And adaptive radiation can lead to the formation of a new species. One of our terms is speciation, which is the formation of a new species. So, an example of adaptive radiation is Galapagos finches. Their different beaks. Oh, my accent just came out so hardly. I'm sorry. Their different beaks were what led to that discovery, because the finches were like the prime species we're talking about here. But the finches were on different parts of the island. So depending on what they ate, it led to a different beak. So some of them ate seeds, some of them ate maybe fish. You see where I'm going with this. You need a different beak to be able to eat what you need. Like, let's put it this way. Like, you don't eat soup with a fork. Like, you eat soup with a spoon. Like, but you do eat a steak with a fork. See where I'm going with this? You need a different, utensil to eat different things. Great. So, right now, we're going to talk about Darwin's theory of natural selection. Darwin's, number one, individuals show variations. Number two, variations will be inherited. And I will give you the definition for inherited. Well, actually, I already did. Heredity is the passing down of traits from parent to offspring from one generation to the next. Okay. So, number three, organisms produce more offspring than can survive. Meaning that in the 1700s, parents produced a lot of kids. We know this. They produced maybe 8 kids. It's whack. I know. But not all of them survived. We know that. Maybe 5 kids out of the 8 survived. Meaning, again, referring to number 3, organisms produce more offspring than can survive. So the environment cannot handle all of these kids produced. So some of them, sadly, are going to pass away. But number 4, variations that increase success will be more likely to be passed on to future generations. The best fit or most favorable will survive. That is basically the definition of natural selection. And if you were in North Carolina, that is going to be on the biology EOC exam. I know that for a fact. I'm sorry. It's sad. I know. If you do not live in North Carolina, I would advise checking with your biology teacher and seeing what you need to know. And obviously, if you hear me talking about something that you have not heard of or do not know, it's probably not going to be on your exam. Okay. So, natural selection. Mutant alleles will spread through a population, and they could spread by mostly sexual reproduction. It could spread through asexual reproduction, but sexual reproduction is the way that it will most likely pass through. If an allele exerts a harmful effect, it will reduce the ability of the individual to reproduce, and the allele will probably be removed from the population. In contrast, mutants with favorable effects are preferentially passed on. Okay, there's artificial selection and natural selection. Artificial selection is the breeding of individuals with specific traits to produce offspring with the same traits. Natural selection is random. Keyword, random. Artificial had the keyword of breeding, meaning it was not random. Natural selection is random mating of individuals with traits that make them better able to survive in their environment, referring to survival of the fittest. Okay, let's see. I might give you guys more vocabulary because, actually, no. Let's just get on with the subject. There are 3 types of natural selection: stabilizing selection, directional selection, and disruptive selection. Stabilizing selection is the intermediate phenotype. Okay, it is when the intermediate phenotype survives, otherwise known as the average individual. An example of that is the baby size. Like, the size of a baby, maybe, okay, so earlier in the years, or from maybe the 70s or 80s, technology was not so great, and not all babies that were produced survived. So the average weight for a baby is 7 to 8 pounds, but a baby that is under that weight would most likely not survive in that time period, and a baby that was most likely born higher than 7 to 8 pounds did not make it in that time period. So it would most likely look like this. Here is the bell curve. Anything that was born on this side would not make it. If it was born on this side, it would not make it. This was the average. The little top point, yep, average. The little arrows are talking about the selection against the extremes. Directional selection is referring to one extreme or the other survives. So, an example of that was the peppered moths. We talked about that earlier. The peppered moths were when the darker allele was selected for the trees that had soot on them, and the lighter allele was selected for the trees that did not have soot on them. And what that looks like, this is the original, the dotted line. This is now the present. It's one or the other, past or present. The dotted line was the original population, and the darker line is the population after selection. Next, disruptive selection. Both extremes survive after selection. So I'm going to give you guys an example of that to explain that. So they're black, gray, and white puffballs. The black puffballs live on an ash mountain, and the white live on a snow mountain. The gray lives on both, but they get eaten as they are seen easier. So what I'm talking about is the black and gray puffballs lived on the ashy mountain, and the white and gray puffballs also lived on the white mountain. But there was a predator that came and ate them. So what do you think is going to be seen easier? The black's going to blend in with the ash, and the white is going to blend in with the snow. So the gray is obviously seen easier. The gray becomes extinct. So what that is going to look like is this little bell curve. The dotted line, once again, is the original. The arrow is pointing to the selection against the mean. So there's 2 bell curves. If, let's just say, this is the black side of the mountain, this is the white side of the mountain. The gray are going to die. So it's going to create 2 different bell curves. So this little line right here is going to go away, and now there's going to be 2 different bell curves. Let's talk about the 4 patterns of evolution. 1. Divergent. Divergent describes evolution toward different traits in closely related species, due to different environments. Words you need to know for divergent evolution include geographic isolation, speciation, homologous structures, and common ancestors. An example of that is the woolly mammoth and modern elephant. They share a common ancestor. The woolly mammoth lived in an icy environment, which led to it having more fur. But the modern elephant lives in a more hotter terrain. So they don't have fur, obviously, as we can see. So number 2, convergent. It describes evolution towards similar traits in distant species due to similar environments. So words we need to know for that is shared environment, analogous structures, and unrelated species. And unrelated is in quotation marks because unrelated, we're talking about evolution. And from evolution's point, we're all related. And from Earth's point, we're all related. So an example of this is the flying bat, flying dinosaur, and the bird. They all have flying abilities, and if you look at them, which if you Google this or if you research pictures of them, you can see a flying bat, a flying dinosaur, and bird all have similar structures, but they are not related. They're distant. So another example of this is the ichthyosaur, the dolphin, and the shark. The ichthyosaur, I know that's not how you pronounce it. I'll show you the word that I'm trying to talk about. So if you want to Google it, here's what we're talking about. The ichthyosaur. If you want to Google it to see what I'm talking about, go ahead. Please do not talk about my nails. I know they're crusty. Don't talk about it. The ichthyosaur and the dolphin were once land animals. The shark was not. So the ichthyosaur and dolphin both have a set of lungs, and they both need to come up from the water to get air. And the shark does not. Number 3 is coevolution. Coevolution is when species can shape each other over time. 2 or more species can evolve together through coevolution. Evolutionary paths are connected. Species evolve in response to changes in each other. So, for example, flowering plants and insects. So, they can develop in competition. For example, crabs and snails. Thicker-shelled crabs eat thicker-shelled and spined snails. Many species evolve from one species during adaptive radiation. So that was a bit of a random point, but it is true. Many species evolve from one species during adaptive radiation. We talked about that earlier. Okay, let me give you some quick definitions because I'm about to talk about something that I have not talked about yet. So, genetic drift. It is a change in the frequency of an allele's occurrence in a population due to random chance. It acts on the genotype. And earlier we talked about natural selection. Natural selection acts on the phenotype. Okay, gene flow. It is when 2 isolated populations swap genetic information. An example of that is, okay, I'm going to draw this out. It is when a triangle loves a circle. That is not something that can actually happen, but we're just going to give that example because it is easiest to understand. They produce offspring, and it is going to look like this. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about because this is a triangle. It does not look like a triangle. Loves a circle. They will reduce like a teardrop, you know? So a triangle is on the other side of a mountain. It met a circle on the other side. They reproduced and they came up with a teardrop. That teardrop is going to produce with maybe a circle or a triangle, which again, it will swap genetic information and become up with some other type of organism looking thing. That was offensive. I'm so sorry, triangle. I just have managed to offend triangle and circle. That's great. Okay. Speciation. It is the formation of a new species. Let's talk about genetic drift a little more. Again, it is a random events causing a change in a population over time due to random chance. So, there's two types of genetic drift. There's the bottleneck effect. Most of the species is wiped out and only a small amount survive to reproduce. The cause of the bottleneck effect is a natural disaster and even hunting. Number 2, founder's effect. Founder's effect is when a small subgroup of a population breaks off and develops a different genetic makeup. So, the cause of it is a subgroup leaves and repopulates. And let's talk about the cause of speciation. It is geographic isolation and adaptive radiation. Species can become extinct. So, mass extinctions. They're rare, but they do happen. 5 have been tracked over time. And one that most people have heard of or know is the dinosaurs becoming extinct. So, there's more things that we need to talk about. Sorry guys, 26 minutes in and we've only covered a little bit of it. We have a little bit more. It's okay though. You guys can get through it and you guys will be just fine. So, for a North Carolina EOC, you will need to be able to explain the theory of evolution. You need to know anatomical, biochemistry, and fossil evidence. Theories of how it started, protocells. And you need to know the first anaerobic and prokaryotic, then photosynthetic, then eukaryotic, then multicellular, which is basically the endosymbiotic theory. And then you need to know the origins of life. I'm going to talk about most of that right now because we did not cover most of that. So, let me explain something to y'all really quickly because I just talked about endosymbiotic theory. Well, I mentioned it. That is an example of the origin of life. Endosymbiotic theory is where some of the prokaryotic cells swallow other prokaryotic cells. Those swallowed cells developed into the organelles of the cells that swallowed them, which led to eukaryotic cells, and eukaryotic cells led to multicellular organisms. I just needed to mention that real quickly because it is a part of evolution that you need to know. Let's talk about structural adaptations and physiological adaptations. Mimicry, camouflage, antibiotic resistance for bacteria, pesticide resistance in insects are all examples of structural adaptations and physiological adaptations. Mimicry is the copying the appearance of another organism to help protect yourself. An example of that is when a type of butterfly, it copied a monarch butterfly. A monarch has an awful taste and it kind of it excretes a toxicity. Okay. If you have not been on my channel before, welcome. I can't talk or pronounce, so you're in for a run. Toxicity. So, the butterfly that looked similar to the monarch was able to survive longer and had more than it would if it did not look like the monarch. Organisms know not to eat a monarch due to its awful taste and its toxicity. So, if let's just say for us humans, we know we shouldn't eat some foods. So, if we saw food that looked remotely similar to the food that we weren't supposed to eat, we know we should not eat it. So, going back to the butterfly example, an organism knows not to eat the monarch, so they're not going to eat the butterfly that looks like the monarch, because they just don't know. And you guys are like, a monarch is a butterfly? I know. I just don't know the exact name of the butterfly that copied the appearance of the monarch. Maybe you do. Comment it down below. It's great. Words you need to know for structural and physiological adaptations: nutrition, respiration, transport and excretion, camouflage, and movement. Reproductive adaptations are how do we explain this? It is a trait that helps in reproductive success. Words you need to know for reproductive adaptation is sexual versus asexual. Eggs, referring to chickens and snakes have eggs. Seeds, spores, placental, and types of fertilization. Behavioral adaptations. It is the behavior that you're born with that helps you survive. Let's talk about the evidence for the theory of evolution. So, jumping back on the theory of evolution, the evidence of it is fossil evidence, anatomical, and biochemistry, which you need to know for the North Carolina EOC. Fossil evidence. One provides a record of a previous life form. 2, fossil record is incomplete. William Smith mapped rocks and fossils of Britain. He and others showed that different species existed in the past compared with today. Anatomical evidence. Homologous structures, vestigial structures, and embryology is part of anatomical. So a homologous structure is when all vertebrates have the same basic bone structure and their front limbs. The bones are just different sizes. So, example, a human and a dog, you may notice similar bone structure. We all have our humerus, our radius and our ulna, our metacarpal, our phalanges. It's similar bone structure, but it's different in size. A vestigial structure is a structure that no longer serves a purpose. The example of this is the eyes of cave-dwelling organisms. So a fish that lives in a cave is blind because there's no light that allows them to produce. You know what I mean. Okay. So they are blind. Their eyes no longer serve a purpose because there's no light in the cave. But a fish that is in fresh or salt water need to see because there's light. So referring to the eyes, the structure referring to the eyes no longer serves a purpose for the fish in the cave. Embryology is a shared feature of young embryos, suggests a distant common ancestor. All vertebrates have a tail and pharyngeal slits. So pharyngeal slits are basically kind of like gills. It allows them to breathe. And a tail, our tailbone, we all have a tailbone. Sometimes the tailbone grows more than it needs to, and then surgery needs to be taken in place to get rid of the excess tailbone. And yeah, tailbone usually stops growing, and we all are an example of that. Biochemistry. Biochemistry suggests that closely related organisms have similar DNA sequences. Organisms that are biochemically similar have more proteins in common. Let's talk about the origin of life. Francesco Redi's experiment. He disproved spontaneous generation. I'm so sorry. Let me say that again. He disproved spontaneous generation, also known as abiogenesis. He basically proved biogenesis was a thing. Example was he put meat in a jar, covered it with a cheesecloth so that all the bacteria could get in, but the flies couldn't. So since the flies couldn't get in there, there were no maggots. Maggots do not appear. Said that wrong. Maggots do not appear from decaying meat. We know that now. So let's just look at something. Okay, another example of this is back in the olden days, they had barrels of dirty socks. And in the barrel of dirty socks, rats were in there most of the time. So they thought rats appeared from old socks in barrels. But we know that's not true. We know that it came from life, which is biogenesis. So now we're going to talk about Louis Pasteur. If Pasteur, it's talking about pasteurized. We know about pasteurized milk. How many of you have ever had pasteurized milk. I'll give you a hint. If you bought milk from the store, you have. He proved that pre-existing microorganisms present in the air can contaminate the nutrient broth. For example, he had a glass flask, and he sterilized it by boiling the broth. So he had an interesting flask, and it had like this neck part on it, and it looked like an S curve. So on that, when he boiled the broth, he noticed that there was no bacteria. When he left he said an unbroken flask remained sterile, but a broken flask became contaminated. The S curve broke off the flask, and the broth became contaminated. What that was the bacteria was sitting in the S curve. So, guys, have you ever looked under your sink and you notice like the little curve that's going like in the pipe? That's basically what that is. Okay, to understand the origin of life, we must talk about Earth's early history. Earth was comprised of hydrogen, cyanide, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and etc. So, also, Earth was very hot. So, based on Alexander Opern's opinion, he suggested how mixtures of the organic compounds necessary for life could have arisen from simpler compounds found on Earth. So, if we're talking about the origin of life, we must talk about protocells. Protocell was the first cell on Earth, which the first cell on Earth was prokaryotic. It was a bacteria cell. It was anaerobic, meaning it did not use air. It was not anaerobic. No air. It had no nucleus or membrane-bound organelle, so prokaryotic. And because of this, it led to prokaryotic cells eating other prokaryotic cells, and the cells that it swallowed became the organelles of it. And again, led to eukaryotic cells, which led to the endosymbiotic theory. And that led to, there was already oxygen on Earth, believe me. It was in plants, in the water. But the oxygen was then more so produced for photosynthesis. And I know, that is it. We've looked through evolution. You've made it through this whole video talking about evolution. And now you know the science behind it. Maybe you don't believe it because of your religion, but we need to know it for biology class, whether you believe it or not. And I'm so sorry that it is against your religion and that you need to know it. But I am here to help you understand about evolution due to our class notes. I don't want to get in the topic of religion. I just don't want to see it in our comments below because I came here to discuss evolution for the kids whose teachers did not explain it enough or in a way for them to understand. So please don't attack me in any way. I am just explaining the science part of it. I did not say this stuff. I mean, I did. But I didn't say it in a way that you need to know it. You need to believe this. You need to do that. No. If it's not a part of your religion, it's okay. I'm not telling you need to know it. I'm just helping for a biology class. Again, this is a touchy subject. Please don't leave any nasty comments below. Thank you guys for sticking around with this long video. And once again, there is this Quizlet that I have made. The Evolution of Biology Honors Miss Cross. And my username is nerd1244. I made this in 6th grade and I already changed my name 2 times. I'm sorry, don't attack me. There's 57 terms, but we cover that in this whole video. So, if you stayed around, you know what we're going to be talking about on this Quizlet. So, this is just a way to learn. You can write them out, you can spell it, you can test yourself, which is great. You can match the items. You can use gravity, which is a great way to study them. It's like little meteors are coming at you, and you need to break the meteors before it comes and kills your Earth. And there's also flashcards, which if you're an old classic, use the flashcards. Okay? Love you. Alright. So that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and watching this video. I'm sorry. Great. Okay, I really don't know how to end this video. I don't have an outro. That's not how I talk. Oh, Lord. Again, you've probably learned throughout this whole video that I can't talk correctly. So, yeah, great. I don't have an outro. So you guys are just probably gonna, like, click out by now because, like, I'm probably just gonna keep talking until you realize that I don't know what to say. Right? Yeah, great. So, actually, I'm just gonna say bye because I'm an awkward little bean who does not do this type of stuff. Okay. This was supposed to be a serious video explaining evolution. I'm so sorry if you kind of got triggered by me being a little fun during this, but I feel like you can't be all serious during topics like this. You need to explain it in a way that makes sense to people. And I feel like if you're talking about all seriousness, someone's going to zone out and be bored or not pay attention to any of it. So I try making it a little fun so you guys could pay attention to it and, like, understand. I didn't really include any pictures or, like, anything on here just because I wanted y'all, maybe if you were on a hurried class, you just wanted to pop in your earbuds and you can't watch the video, I just gave you guys a, what is this called? Non-visual explanation. There are some visual parts in here that you need to look at your phone for or a computer, but it's just real quick, and I think I pointed out when. Great. Love you. Okay. So I'm just gonna say bye now. Okay. Bye, my lovely people. Come back if I post more. I'm sorry. Okay. Bye.